So one of the most exciting features of Photoshop is that you can create your images by using layers. This gives you infinite control over any of the changes that you make. Layers also give you full control over your composite images. Retouching and just about every part of the magic of Photoshop starts with layers. So today we're going to begin our journey into layers. Let's go. Hi, I'm Terry Vanderheiden, professional photographer, and I'm teaching you Photoshop from the very beginning. Today, here on this episode 7, we're going to be working in the section on layers. Probably the most powerful part of learning Photoshop is understanding layers. We'll take it slow at first, and then we'll amp it up as we go. So let's jump in. So we're starting here inside of Photoshop, and I've got an image opened up, and you can see over here in the layers palette, this is the area that we're going to work on today, is the layers and how layers work to make Photoshop so amazing. So as you can see here, I've got this image here. It says background layer. Now, one of the things on the layers palette is just a little bit of housekeeping that we'll do. If you right click in the layers palette, you can say no thumbnails, or you can do small thumbnails, or you can do large thumbnails. So whatever you feel like. I usually do large thumbnails because I really want to see what it is that I'm working on simply. So on the very first image, the background layer, that's the base of the layers. If you kind of picture layers being, sheets of glass. So here's your picture, and on top of it's a sheet of glass, then another sheet of glass, another sheet of glass. These are all layers that when you're looking straight down through it, they all kind of combine to make one image. So in this case, our background layer is this woman on the background, and then let's go ahead and we'll put a text layer across her. So that's a simple move of layers. So we've got, in this particular case, let's go ahead and make sure this is zoomed out so we can see everything in here. We can take and move our layers however we want. Now, when we have the move tool activated up here, we can move things according to how it is on the layers palette. So let's select both of those layers together. And we did that by, we selected the first layer, then we held down the shift key and selected another layer. Now they're both selected. And what you can do is you can tell Photoshop to arrange these however you want. If let's say we wanted to arrange them centered, we would click on that and that would center it. We could center it from top to bottom and center the image that way. So any of the things that we do, if we move this layer, this text type down over here, for instance, and we select both of those layers again, and we say, okay, Photoshop, make that in the center on both places. So it'll put it in the center for us. If we want to do it on the right-hand side, we can do that. We can do left-hand side. This allows us to move layers around and align them however it is we want. We've got the two layers aligned, but you don't have to have them aligned. You can move them wherever you feel like it. And you can see that, let's say, for instance, in this case, we want to have the woman in front of the text. So we'll just drag that layer down below. Oh, wow. Oh, look at that. So since it's a background layer and has this little lock icon, that means we're unable to move layers around it, right? We can move layers up here. So let's say, let's do another text layer. So on this particular case, now we have these layers here, and you see there's no locks on the side. So we're able to put these however we want. We can move this layer up to the top, and now it's in front of, so that glass essentially got moved up. So this layer is in front of that layer. We can move it back, and now the red text is in front of the white text. But we still can't do anything with this background layer because the background layer is locked. If you ever want to move the background layer, there's a couple of theories that I like to do. One of the ways that I like to work in Photoshop is to take and duplicate this layer. So a real shortcut to duplicating, you already know it, and that's Command J or Control J from the PC, and that'll make a new layer. If you want to get rid of a layer, you can just drag it right down here into the trash. Another way to make a new layer is to drag this down to the little plus sign, and it'll duplicate that layer. If you'd like a new empty layer, you click on the plus sign, and that brings you up to a new empty layer. So I do want to show you this real quick, because it's kind of important. An empty layer will show up as this little checkerboard. That means it's transparent, means there's nothing in that file. And there'll be times, well, you'll have an image there, but everything else is transparent. So keep that in mind as we go through. So let's get rid of this open one. We'll get rid of that. And now we have our images. Now you can see this one doesn't have a lock. So we could move this around. We could move it up to here if we wanted. And now that's above the layers text. It still doesn't solve our problem in the sense we want to have the woman in front of the text, for instance. So let's get out of this one and we'll go into another one that we've already done some of the work. As you've learned from some of the other classes of how to select, we selected her out and put her on her own empty background. And this is a transparent background, and we're able to move her around wherever we want, and we have that freedom. We also created a background. So let me show you how I did that. We'll turn that off. Came over here to New Layer, click that, and automatically, whatever layer you're on, when you click New Layer, it's going to put it just above the layer you were just working on. So what we're going to do is drag that below that layer, and we're going to come over to our gradient tool, and let's go ahead and let's assign some colors. First, we'll go to our foreground color, and we'll make that a dark blue. And then we're going to go to our background color, and we're going to make that. So what I do sometimes when I want to get a similar color is I click on this color with the eyedropper tool. It'll turn into the eyedropper tool when we kind of hover over it. And now that shows us exactly where that color was. So if we wanted something similar but maybe lighter, we might come up over here and grab that color. And now you can see down here we have a dark blue and a light blue. So let's go to our gradient tool. And if we were to click on here, we can go to basics. We can see we have our options. This was something we did before where we went from a color to transparency. But on this one, we're just going to go from 2 different colors. So let's click on that. We're going to use the linear type of gradient. So let's go ahead and drag that down. And if you ever want to do something really straight, just hold the shift key down. Every time you hold the shift key down, then that'll be a straight type of a line. It's any kind of action that you're doing in Photoshop, the shift key creates a straight line, which is kind of handy. So we click and let it go. And so now we've got dark in the background and light on the foreground as she's walking. So that's how we create this type of a layer. So this is just a background layer, and we're going to name this blue. So when you want to name layers and I really encourage you to name layers, because when you do, you'll remember what these things are. So this is the blue layer, for instance, and we'll say this is the woman. And this one actually, when you do a text layer, it actually says whatever it is that you're saying. So it'll just copy that. So let's go ahead and turn that on. And so there we have, she is behind the text now because we put the text. Now, if we want to take this, put her in front of the text like we want to do, now look at it. We have the ability to move the layer around however we want to visually see whatever we want. And over here, if you've noticed, I've been fiddling with this. These are little eyeballs. And what an eyeball does is turns off and on the visibility of a layer. So if you don't have your eyeballs on, you can't see anything. But here's an eyeballs on, and you're able to see that layer. So take a look at these. We've just turned all these on, but why can't we see them? We can't see them because the layer above it is covering it. So let's go ahead and turn these off. And you can see that now we can have this layer's on, and then this layer's on. And you can see how we can look right through that and see these, because these are no longer visible. Let's turn that one on. Now that one is what's visible. And if I didn't like that order, I could drag this up. A little blue line occurs, then you let it go, and now you've got it in a new position. So you have a way of dealing with these layers in Photoshop in order to just control the levels that we're looking at it. So again, remember, thinking of in terms of looking down through sheets of glass, we're looking straight from the top down through here. And whenever we have a layer, we have the ability to have a lot of control over that layer. One of the things that we will get into later is these are the blend modes of each layer. So a layer will act differently depending on what we tell it to do. And then over here is opacity. I think we've already learned that a little bit. And opacity will be something where we can grab our little scrubby slider and go to the right and fade that number down, or fade the number of the opacity down to allow how much we want to see through that. So in this case, it's 55%. So we're seeing through the layers palette at 55%. Let's reverse that. Let's take the woman, put her on top, and we're going to dissolve her by 50%. Now, if you want exactly 50%, you can simply come up here, highlight this, and type in 50. That'll be 50%. If you want to come in here and type in 100, then that will be at 100%. Or you can pull down here, do the slider, and slide to whatever level you want to show something at. Or you can go up, which I typically do is I put my cursor right on the word opacity, and then I click and then drag it to the left for a little bit less and drag it to the right for more. So this is pretty cool. We've got her set up, and we've got layers behind her. And let's say we want to put the layers in front of her. Let's go ahead and do that. But let's say, for instance, in this case, we would like to see the layers kind of fold behind her. So let's try this. The way we're going to do it is we're going to make a selection out of the woman. And the way we do that, if we recall from one of the last episodes, Command click will make a selection of her. Now, if we go up here and we say, let's make a layer mask, which we'll get into layer masks. They're super cool. But we'll just click on here and make a little layer mask. And you see what it did is it made everything black behind her, but white where she is at. And that reveals just those parts of those layers. So let's invert that. And the way we invert anything in Photoshop is Command I, and that'll invert it. So now what we've got is we've got the woman in front of the text as normal. But what we can do is we can take our paintbrush, as long as we're painting on this black and white layer mask, and again, we'll get into layer masks again a little bit later, we can take our paintbrush tool, and let's just so we see what we're doing, we'll take the woman and we're going to put her at, I don't know, 30% or something so we can see. So we've got the woman on a layer, and now we have our text on a layer above her, but we have it with a mask that we created by selecting her and then making a mask. Now what we can do with our paintbrush is we can go in and paint in white and reveal just that letter. You don't have to be super accurate because we're just trying to get this letter to come up, right? So now we've got the woman and she's at 55%. Let's go ahead and bring her up. Now we have the woman in between the letters. So you can see we can control anything we want as long as we put things in layers in Photoshop. That way we can really control what it is that we're doing. Now, if we wanted to make this just even a little more realistic, let's go in and take a new layer. We'll add it right above it, because remember, whenever that was the last one that was highlighted. So whenever you have a highlighted layer, that's where that new layer is going to go. So let's get rid of that, and I'll show you that again. We're highlighted on this layer here, and we'll hit the plus sign, and a new layer, empty layer, shows up. Now in this empty layer, let's go ahead and take our brush tool. Let's go back to our default colors, which is black and white. You do that by just pressing the letter D. And now watch what we can do. Let's go ahead and take a soft brush, and we're going to paint behind this letter. And look what we've done. We've created a little depth. Let's go ahead and bring the opacity on that shadow back, and let's go ahead and label this shadow. And now we've got a little bit of a shadow, so we can see that that text is laying over her. And what about this? Do we want to do the same thing up there? Let's try it. Let's go up here. We'll make a new layer, put it above it. And we actually want to put this text, it has to be behind the woman. And we want to cast a shadow from the woman to the text. So if we were to paint like this, that wouldn't work, right? So let's undo that. Let's go ahead and select our woman again. Command, click. Now we got her selection back. Now we're going to hide that selection so we don't have to look at it. We're going to come up here to paint. But before we do that, we're going to invert that selection. So we're going to do everything but her. So Shift Command I, or Shift Control I for the PC. And now what we're going to do is paint. Let's hide that again. Command H. Now we're going to paint on the background here. Let's undo that. And then let's bring the opacity down. And we'll put a little bit over here by her elbow. And now what we've done is we've created these layers to look in between. We've got part of the words here, we've got her in the middle, and then she's casting a shadow onto that text. And obviously you would probably make that pretty shallow in terms of a, and we'll get into shadow making. That's a whole nother, almost a whole lesson on making shadows, but it's really fun because you make a shadow on its own layer and you're able to deal with it and move it around and control it quite a bit better. So this is just the basics of how layers work. One of the things I like to do whenever I come into a new image is I like to make a copy of the background layer. We can do that two ways, of course. We can drag it down to the plus, or we can get rid of it and we can hit Command J, which is what I like to do most of the time. And if for deleting one, we can obviously drag it down to the trash can. Another way to delete a layer is to just hit the delete key. Boom, and it's gone. So let's go ahead and add a new layer here so we can see what we've done. And adding a new layer will increase the size of the file, but it does give us a way to go back and whatever changes we make on a file, it's not going to be messed up. For instance, if we're on this layer, we take our paintbrush and we say, oh, let's just paint back around over here and see how that looks. And we might say, oh, okay, that looks good. Oh, it looks terrible. Let's get rid of it. But it's all on this layer. So we can turn that off and see how we started, turn it on, see how we ended up. We can actually take this layer and run the opacity back if we wanted to. So opacity is such a cool function on these layers. And this is what I like about it so much, is that when you're working layers, you then have real simple access to opacity to that layer. So let's go ahead and throw that out. We'll make a new one here. Now let's say, for instance, we wanted to sharpen this file. I always like to duplicate my file before I sharpen it because it gives me a lot more freedom. So let's go ahead and zoom up here, see what we've got. And let's go up to filter. We'll get into sharpening in another class, but just for today, we're just going to do unsharp mask, and we're going to put the little box right here, and we're going to make it, we'll do a lot of extreme sharpening here, and we'll click OK. So now as we see this, you can see we can turn this layer off and the sharpening goes away, or we can turn the layer on and the sharpening goes back. If we've done it too much and we want to turn it back down a little bit, then we grab our opacity of that layer and start sliding it down and working it down to a point where we really like how that sharpening looks. So as we get into Photoshop, we're going to learn a lot more about sharpening. Later in these classes, I'm going to talk to you about sharpening in detail. And through the use of layers, we can get some precise and amazing results in sharpening our images. However, to get the best results, you need to have sharp images out of the camera. That's why I wrote the book, Razor Sharp Nature Photography. This is sold as an instantly downloadable ebook exclusively on my website, imagelight.com. You can download the book onto your iPad, your phone, and take it with you out in the field to refer to the tips to get sharper images. I'll leave a link in the description so you can get your copy of Razor Sharp and you can start making sharper images today. Now let's get back to these layers. And let's go ahead and get rid of our sharpening layer for now. Now what we're going to do is we'd like to put her on a different background. So we knew from our last episodes of selecting, there's lots of different ways to select. All right, so let's make our copy of our background layer. And let's go ahead and grab one of our tools. We'll grab the object selection tool, come across the top here. We're going to do select subject, but we're going to use the cloud for a little more detailed results, because you have an option here when you're selecting a subject, either device or cloud, and it says more detailed results, and I'm all over that. So we just click select subject, see how it does. Great, you can see we've got a selection around her. Let's go ahead and put her up onto her own layer. Command J, Control J. And then we test it like we did the other day. We're going to grab a new layer. We click down here to add a new layer. Let's drag it below and let's just fill it with color. And we'll grab a color. Great. Now we can kind of see how well that selection, decent selection, is pretty fast. Kind of messed up a little bit up here. So let's go up here and take our eraser tool and we'll just erase away some of those stray hairs that aren't going to do us any good. Right there. That's pretty good. Now we have our subject separated from any background. So let's go ahead and get rid of this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to grab a new background. So let's go and open up a new file. So now we have this new file. So what we want to do is we'd like to put her onto her own background. So real simply, we move her out of the way, grab this picture, and we're just going to drag it. If we hold the Shift key, when we drag it over, it'll be centered in this file. So we just hovered over the picture, let it go, and now it's centered over that file. Now you can see this image is quite a bit smaller than our original image of the woman. So what we need to do is enlarge it. And I think we talked about this already, but let's go up to Edit, and we're going to Transform, and we're going to go to Scale. Little anchor points come up, and we can just drag those up. Drag it all behind her. Perfect. Now we got pictures of the mountains. Okay, let's move our layers. Let's grab her and put her in front of the mountains. So there we go. We have her laughing in front of the Dolomites in Italy, because everybody likes to do that. A simple way of moving layers around to get what we're looking for. So let's do this again. Let's go up here and go to Open. And we'll open a new file. We'll open this one of Paris. And let's go ahead and drag that behind her. Hit our Move tool with the V key. Isn't that weird? Move. Use the Move tool so you hit V. Move. So that's, I guess, how you remember it. Move. All right, so let's go ahead and slide this over. And we'll transform it. Transform, scale. Drag this thing up. And let's put her on top again. So we just drag her up on top with our layers, and now we have her in Paris. But you can't really tell it's Paris because, the Eiffel Tower can't be seen. So let's go ahead and move her. We can hit our V key and slide her over. And the background, actually, we could probably do a little bit of work on that. Let's turn that off for a second, and let's transform one more time. We'll make it a little bit larger. And we'll just move it over to this side and hit Enter. Now turn her back on, and we can see where it is. So if you want to be more exact, a great way to deal with layers, instead of turning it off, which is what I just did, you can take this layer and bring the opacity down. So it's like a little thin little version of her. So then we can take this layer, do our transform again, and start moving it around till we get it. Okay, that's where we see it. Let's go ahead and maybe get it a little bit bigger so it can be outside of her shoulder. There we go. So we know we have that right. And then once we get that, we come back to the top layer and we can simply bring the opacity back. So this, again, you can see here that we've got these layers laid out. We have our original, then we made a copy of it in case we wanted to make some changes. And then we put a background of mountains, then we put a background of Paris, and we can decide which do we like better. Do we like the mountains or do we like Paris? So we can flip between those two. And if you recall, any image that covers another image is going to cover it, right? So as we go like this, that's going to cover the mountains. But if we want to see just the mountains or just Paris, and we turn this off, then we go back to our original one and it's showing through down into this image. So let's go back. That's a way working with layers, building a simple composite so you can have a different background with your subject. So remember, that's why we learned about selecting first. Once you are able to select well, then you can start moving things around and do whatever it is you want. So we were able to select this, and then we put it on our own, whatever background we wanted to put it on. If you're enjoying these free classes on learning Photoshop, take a moment to hit the like button, then hit the subscribe button. And remember to ring that little bell icon to be reminded of my next video. This is just the first installment dedicated to layers, so you won't want to miss any episodes. Now, if you have any questions of some of the topics I've already covered, feel free to leave the questions in the comments below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Remember, you can always reach me via email at terry@imagelight.com if you'd rather contact me that way. Next time, we're going to get into more about layers. Thanks for watching.